All right, so I am here with Varun Chandresekhar. He is a recent graduate from Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University.
Yeah.
Big Urban Meyer fan over here. But he was a jazz guitar performance.
Yep, and music theory.
And
Yep.
music theory major.
Yep.
And we have both been talking. We went to high school together. And we've been talking recently about how there is a lack of good information on YouTube about how to be a good private or group guitar instructor, and so we wanted to kind of address that a little bit. So where I'd like to start, I think a good place to start that conversation is, who was a music teacher that you had that not only inspired you, but was really on top of their stuff, and why was that?
I would say probably I had a teacher named Greg Wolfman. No, not Greg. Shoot, what was his last name? That's not proving my point well. But I get Greg. He was my private guitar teacher from my junior year of high school to right when I left high school and went to college. And he was so while we were there, he was getting his degree in music ed at ASU. And I went to a couple of his gigs. Like, that was the first time I really saw like a gigging musician. He showed me all this like hip music, like introducing me to like a lot of the classic jazz players like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Grant Green, all of those guys. He was like explaining like, oh, in music, like this is really what we're doing. You know, like I'm taking these theories, oral classes, so on and so forth. And then like showing that to me as like a high schooler who didn't really know what am I going to do when I graduate. I think that was really the first person who showed me what potentially like music could do, you know?
Yeah, that's huge.
And like, you know, like to that point, like even like that's just like such a big influence like on a kid. Like I don't think I realized, like I don't want to say like I necessarily like looked up to like my guitar teachers as like idols or anything, because I don't know if like high school me could necessarily like vocalize that, but I realize now like how much I try to like think about my upbringing and how much like I try to like model myself or like around like I had another guy, Chris Forens, who was my teacher before that, how much I tried to like model myself around them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like that, like as a guitar teacher, is like that's our like one of those ultimate goals, you know? To like, be a role model, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And along those lines, one thing I think about a lot as a teacher is, so I mean, first off, there's always the challenge of developing trust with your student. And then what do you do with that trust once you've kind of earned it? So what's an example of maybe something that Greg, or did you say Chris was the other guy?
Yeah.
What's an example of something they had you do where you were like, I don't really see the point of it, but they were like, trust me, and then they tried to connect the dots for you, where it might have been something initially where you were kind of hesitant to be like, well, I don't understand, but they kind of pushed you through it, and because you trusted them, you learned something.
Yeah. I think like probably the first big one was like the caged method, you know, with Chris, like, cause I had been playing guitar seriously for maybe 3 or 4 years before I started taking lessons with Chris. And like, you know, you're like a hotshot YouTube guitarist, like, you know, you think you have like all these ideas. And so like learning how to play, like actually like connecting what I was doing, and like, because like when you learn that like cage system on top of that, you start like seeing how like everything connects the dots. You know, you're starting to see how like this C chord and like this C chord are like these hyperconnected things. And so like those big deal things really showed me like the potential of learning everything about the instrument. And like that's not to say I'm anywhere near like mastering this instrument. Like I just played a B flat chord and called it a C chord, you know. So yeah. I would say that's one. And like rhythm, you know, like that's another big one. Like showing your like, and that was for me, like showing that I had deficiency in my playing. That like I had major problems like staying, like the first lesson he put on a metronome, and like I was lost. And so I think like those were some big ones, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And good. And so now that you have transitioned, I mean, obviously you're still a student because you're always a student.
Yeah.
But now that you've transitioned into teaching your private lessons and teaching students how to play music, has there been a moment where you kind of looked back on something that one of those teachers had done for you, where you were like, oh, I get that now, or like, wow, like it's such a challenge with this particular kid, even though I might have learned it easily, or something like that?
Yeah, I think that the idea of like it's so hard. What I think makes teaching hard is the fact that you need like some like universal system, because you can't just go like, oh, we're just gonna do whatever. I feel like, but at the same time, like everyone has these like certain roadblocks, and so I was offered a job to teach at a guitar store, and they had these books where they were like, okay, so there's level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have to, after 3 months or whatever, your student has to be from 0 to 1 or like whatever, and there were certain like consequences, or you wouldn't get raises or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never taught before, and I like right there I was like, well, doesn't that seem kind of problematic? And so I think it's hard to even state like one idea where you think this is like the big thing that's going to make everything like change. And so I think that's really what a truly good teacher is versus like a good fit or just a good player is being able to find out that one thing for each individual student, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that does sound like a kind of a screwed up system, having that series of check marks and also then grading or paying based on that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of the things as a public school teacher, obviously the system is a lot like the public school.
Yeah.
But one thing I think about is how unnatural the system of grading really is. Like the concept that we're all kind of given this number is strange, because in a perfect world, everybody would want to learn for themselves, for the benefit of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've gotten, not only teaching an elective at a public school, but also teaching private students who are paying to have these lessons, is you have students who aren't there because they're getting graded on something.
Yeah.
And it allows the learning process to be much more natural, I've found, than it is in a more regulated public school system. So I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that in terms of why. I guess I don't know how to phrase this question, but I'm curious. What do you think of the concept of grades, and as someone who was graded at a college level, and music, and how those two things kind of interact?
Yeah, I think the big flaw with grading is kind of that it's like a universal, and I understand why for like the sense of academia, we need some way to say this person did better, this person did worse, and we need ways to separate out students. But what I think the problem is with music, and especially like when you're talking about like the private lesson, is we're not all taking music lessons, we're not all playing guitar for the same reasons. So for example, like if you or me were talking about guitar, compared to how someone who maybe just plays guitar for a hobby versus someone who is just a beginner, how we react, and especially when that comes down to like children, like how do you be a good teacher for, let's say, a kid whose parents insist they take lessons, and you know, like I'm sure you've dealt with this, you know, and so like I've figured like I taught piano too, and so like you have like 6-year-old kids who don't care about any musicians yet, and you know, they don't really want to be here, they don't really have the ability to focus, and so for a lot of lessons I would do things like do you ever do Eurythmics?
No.
Oh, so like you'll take like a tennis ball, and I'll just put a drum loop on, and hey, just try to bounce the ball on 2. Try to throw the ball on 1, catch the ball on 2, things like that. And a kid, if they do that, like that's certainly a musical exercise. It'll certainly help build rhythm. is it maybe the most productive musical exercise? No, but it gets the kid having a good time and like interacting. So then that like begs the question, am I doing my job as a music teacher if I'm not giving them the most advanced music technique? And like I think in the public school system, and like I guess in the way we view education in general, like that's kind of frowned upon. Whereas I think if we apply that universally, that kind of creates a better like philosophy of teaching.
I would agree, yeah. I'm curious, yeah, I mean, since we're talking about guitar teaching, I'll kind of give a trick that I had, and then I'm curious to hear some more ideas like that tennis ball, because that tennis ball thing would definitely help some of my students. One thing I would do is I'd get a dice, and for kids who are very young, and I mean, piano is one thing, I've taught young kids piano, and that like, you press a key and a sound happens.
Yeah.
You hit a drum and a sound happens, whereas on the guitar, you gotta like squeeze and then do, the motor skills are much more difficult.
For sure, yeah.
And so when I'm working with students who I'm just trying to get them to make a noise by pressing a fret down and not just strumming open strings, I'd roll a dice, and whatever number it landed on was the fret you had to play, and then roll it again, and however many times that was, that's how many times you had to play it. And we write a song that way.
Cool. Yeah.
And they like that, because that was one way to be like, all right, there's now a dice deciding, so I'm not, deciding for you. And then we make
like
this,
that.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah.
And then we make this nonsense song kind of that they have this weird ownership of. But yeah, so I'm curious, what are some other things you did like that?
Yeah, like one big one for strumming. What I would do is, so like I'd write out like 4 down and 4 ups.
Yeah.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we use a random number generator. And okay, so like let's say it comes up on 7. We take that'd be like the 4th down strum. We take that out, so now we have like a strum like or wait, 1, 2, like that, and then you get through these all like varied like strum patterns, and so that's that's a fun way of like I think taking control, and like even just like random like composition. Like I thought that was so odd whenever I'd have kids who like didn't like composing, because that was always like, once I got like my bearings on the instrument, like I want to write whatever I want. And so I would do one where like I get to play a note, and then you play that note, and then another note, and so it's like a telephone game of composition, stuff like that. Yeah, so those are like, I think like ways you can make it like games are fun. And I think another thing too is just like building confidence in students, because like that's the thing about like guitar, like especially because it's such a hard instrument to like get a good sound. There are a lot of like even like really good guitarists who still don't get good sound on the instrument. And so like building that confidence is something I've like realized and I found like doing things like your place had like concerts, like showcase and stuff like that. I would try to invite teachers in and say like, hey, watch this kid play, let's play along, let's try to build like this sense of community, because I feel like we can't approach every kid, the idea that every kid will become this like superb musician or anything like that. And I would like think like, maybe this kid doesn't become great at guitar, but they learn how to solve a problem, or how if you put in 3 hours of work on guitar, this G chord that sounded like this an hour ago sounds like this now. I think that's like a more important life skill, and that's really what like moms are paying $20 to get their kid to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like even like some kids, like I have some kids who were like 13, 14, where it felt more like, hey, I just want to be like a friend. Just be a like nice voice, or even I had a lady, she was maybe like 75 at the youngest, and she took ukulele lessons more because she just wanted to get out of the house. She really, she had physically, like even ukulele was pretty challenging for her. She didn't really care enough to practice, but we got to talk, and like we get to talk about whatever philosophy of music, philosophy of life, even just just learning about her life. And I feel like that's a lot better than me just saying like, oh, do you remember your G chord shape or whatever, And like I think, and I'm not here to necessarily say that I have the right answers when it comes to that, but I think it's more important than knowing what the right answer is. Just like having your philosophy, you know, like because I think if you do really want everyone to be like this superb musician, you have to kind of come in with like the idea like, oh, like if you don't practice for however many hours, like I'm not going to see you. And I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing. Like I remember my brother, he wanted to take piano lessons, and my parents, they like sought out like a really good piano teacher for like young students. And she said, well, like if he doesn't display natural talent, like if he isn't picking things up like that in the first lesson, I won't teach him. And I used to think that was like a really like negative, like how can you do that? This gift is for everyone. But I realized that then like I can be that teacher, or I can be somewhere in the middle or whatever, or I can even be like, even if a guitar teacher came and didn't teach you anything about guitar, but just talked about the history of the guitar and just showed you all these hip guitar players, is that bad, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's important for everyone to have like a very clear philosophy on what they do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that there's a time and a place for that kind of more dictator style of education. I think that can be appropriate in certain cases, because there's a difference between like I am not going to teach him because he doesn't kind of align with the way I teach, and he shouldn't learn music. Like if the teacher was coming at it from like he didn't pick it up, so he should stop, is different than he didn't pick it up and the way that I teach he needs to have, so maybe find a different teacher. Yeah, obviously a different kind of approach. But I think about that too. I mean, somebody outside of the realm of music, Mr. Bradley, who you had, he was our AP US history teacher at the school that we went to. He kind of did, like going through the education program at ASU, like he kind of did the opposite of what they are preaching now in like most college education programs, in terms of he lectured a lot. His like a lecture heavy style, didn't have a whole lot of interactive elements where you're really getting some hands-on learning stuff. But at the same time, he was the first teacher in high school to ever get me, and probably the only teacher really in high school, other than maybe Cornwell, who really pushed me to work as hard as I possibly could in a class. So there are moments like that where a teacher is kind of more of that kind of strict disciplinarian where it works.
I remember, I think the final day in AP US history, I like came in and we had to do some report on some American cultural thing, and me and Shelby did a report on like Bob Marley. And I played a Bob Marley song in class, and he gave me like a fist bump, and I was like so proud to get like some sense of emotion from him. How do you approach like theory? Like, cause that's something like I've always, and I guess more to just theory is the things that you find interesting versus what the kids find interesting. Cause I realize like I have a flaw where I'm like, oh yeah, I think music theory is awesome. Where like, but everyone should learn music theory, but to like certain kids, like who cares?
Teaching theory for me, it's a couple of steps that I've kind of come up with. I start usually by having kids. I would never start with theory. And some teachers really think that way, where they think that that's like the first thing to start with.
I'll admit I do it pretty early. I don't know about first thing, but like I thought, cause that's always like theory was always the stuff that like kind of made me like that like made everything make sense. Like when like Matchbox 20 goes and what's another song? I love Matchbox 20.
I know you do.
And
I love the Goo Goo Dolls too.
I love man, I like that 90s. I was listening to Counting Crows when I was driving here. So on top, like, or what's another song? Like, any other song that goes like 1 to 4, or then even like finding out that those are all the same thing. Like that made so much sense. And but I really like as a teacher, just because something makes sense to me doesn't mean like
Of
students are gonna understand it, and so like that's always been the hard thing. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. No, of course. And so I start with like trying to get them invested in just performing and playing first. And what I've found is, and it's really funny, especially when I've been teaching at the School of Rock, like the kids are almost like, okay, like I've played on a stage a lot. Can I learn some theory? Like there's definitely, I mean, not every kid, but it's way more common than when I was, you know, around private lessons at a less performance-based kind of thing, because kids were like, I just want to play. I want to stop talking about it. I want to play. And so, you know, it's always like a grass is greener situation. So in that environment, it's very easy to teach theory because they've played so many songs that you can say, all right, that 1 to 4 thing, it's like those 6 songs you played in the last 2 seasons, and you see where it comes in, and they're like, oh, that makes sense. So that's one. But yeah, I always try it. I mean, I do some stuff with the musical alphabet just so I can start talking in letters to them. But I won't delve into like key stuff until they've played a couple of songs, they performed, and they've really like gotten that kind of taste for it. And then in terms of like how I actually teach theory, it's all based on trying to giving them a formula for understanding it, even when there's not a formula. And what I mean by that is like really limiting what we're focusing on, and taking like, I mean, this will be like the thing I say, which is like, I'll have them play just like a major scale, right? And I'll be like, all right, count to 8, play that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'll be like, all right, now, if I asked you to play the 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Do that kind of thing, and like, avoiding all of the pitfalls of like, all right, well, what if it's a flat 6? Like not getting there yet. And so like, it's really like a horse like with the blinders on, like keeping focused on the one thing and making it accessible, and saying like, all right, so this, like if we were to play 6, 1, 4, and then they go 6, 1, 4, and then, you know, just keeping it like that simple. Because I'll do that thing too. I think every music teacher does it where they get in a tangent. Where you're like, the 3 chord, it's minor, unless it's like kind of you're doing that dominant median thing, and then, you know, you're like on 6 different tangents.
I one time, like, a student was talking to me about something, and I just went on like a 15-minute about like chromatic median stuff. Like, if you play this, and then you go up a minor third, and then up a minor third, up a minor third. It'll sound like every movie in the past 20 years. And I was like explaining like all the diminished chord theory, and then I was like looked up, and he was just like, "What are you talking about?" And it's like, it's so hard not to do it, because like
it is.
I'm like, you and me, we're super nerdy about that stuff, and like learning to like brain those things in is like, that's another thing, like going back to that be a better teacher thing.
It's really tough. And I had a student who, he's a really, really good bass player, hadn't played a whole lot of jazz, but really good bass player. He was auditioning for Berkeley. And we were kind of starting to talk about jazz, and I kind of like played him a couple songs, and one of the songs I played him was Giant Steps, and he's like, man, this just sounds like noise. And so I launched into this whole explanation of like what's going on, and he goes, hey, maybe we don't start with that one. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we shouldn't. You're at like, and taking those moments to really, I mean, it's so important to like acknowledge that and not to be like, no, we're starting here. Because it's really easy to be that teacher who's like, maybe we shouldn't start here. It's like, well, maybe we should. Like, what do you mean we shouldn't start here? Like, it's a great song. And like stepping back and be like, yeah, no, like that's my bad. Like, you're absolutely right. Because sometimes, and not all the time, and not maybe even the majority of the time, but sometimes a student will let you know what they need, and it's really important to be listening in those moments.
Learning how to balance that, like, that desire to push them forward with the fact that like being too aggressive can like hurt them, because I think or at least most teachers altruistically like care about their student. You know, like I remember like since I just left a teaching job where I had like 30 students, I was like, I'm gonna go through with like all the students I cared about. I'm gonna go like try and find them on like Facebook, Instagram, whatever, you know, just keep in touch. And I realized like I went through pretty much my entire list, and I was like, I like them, I like them, I like them, I like them, and like you start to care about them.
Of course.
And it's just like, but like how much do you want to, how much are you willing to ask of them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, going back to what we talked about earlier, that's where I really play that trust card, where it's like, look, like, and you have to earn that in terms of you really have to show that you care about them, and you really have to be prepared, and you have to like, you know, back up what you say.
Yeah.
But I've found that that's gotten me through a lot where I've been able to be like, hey, trust me.
I started like playing guitar when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and my parents took me to this guy, and I've been searching for his contact for a while because I just want to like call him and like apologize for like what I was as a student. But that was like part of it. Like I was like a kid, and I like always wanted to know like, okay, well like why would like just this chord and this chord, why do they really go well together and stuff like that. And it always felt like he was kind of just like, let's just purely think about guitar as like a physical thing. And like I think that's such a, I don't know, I just never felt like that was a good way to like create like an attachment to it. Like I don't care that this is just something that like my like fingers can move around and it creates some like airwaves. Like we want to think of it as like a more like higher like guitars are literally like a part of me, you know. And so like answering those whys and explaining like why you should care about these instruments, I think that's like such an important thing.
Absolutely. And I think that is a very succinct and poetic ending. So hopefully you got some good stuff from this. I think it was a good conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun. You can. I'm gonna.
You want to plug?
Yeah, I'm gonna plug. If you follow me on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube at VC Guitar Channel, and you can add me on Facebook too. I'll think you're creepy, but go for it.
And all of those links will be in the description.
All right.
Cool.
Do you have like a catchphrase or anything?
No.
No.
No catchphrase.
No catchphrase. You should.
Just quality content.